Have you ever wondered why the silence of a room sometimes screams louder than any voice? Why, even surrounded by people, you still feel like a shadow watching the play unfold from behind the curtain? There's something ancient in you that does not fit in the noise. Not because you're flawed, but because you remember. Even if you don't know what, even if your mind denies it, your soul remembers. It remembers a truth buried beneath the masks you were taught to wear. And that truth, wild, luminous, dissonant, is the very reason you cannot be around too many people. Not for lack of love, not for fear, but because you were not designed to blend in. You were sculpted to disturb the illusion. Carl Jung called it individuation, not as a process of becoming something new, but of remembering what you already are beneath the persona. And the more you remember, the more the world forgets how to handle you. You become the living contradiction of everything it tried to normalize. You no longer speak to please. You no longer laugh on cue. You walk into rooms and something shifts. A glance held too long, a smile that fades too quickly, a feeling that can't be explained. And the lonelier you feel, the closer you are. To what? That's the question that echoes without language. But you feel it, don't you? In the tightness of your chest when you ignore your own instincts. In the fatigue that doesn't come from your body, but from your soul dragging itself through inauthentic spaces. You try to connect, of course. You smile, you show up, you make yourself small so others don't feel discomfort. But inside, something dies a little. Not loudly, quietly, like a candle flickering in a room with no windows. And you wonder, why can't I be like them? Why do gatherings feel like noise instead of celebration? Why do conversations exhaust rather than nourish? Why does your truth make others recoil? And here lies the wound. Not that you're different, but that the world has convinced you to apologize for it. But tell me, who benefits from your silence? Who profits from your self-doubt? Perhaps this isn't your flaw, but your function. Perhaps you were never meant to join the crowd but to wake it up. And yet, the ache persists. Because even chosen ones, especially them, long to be seen. Not admired, seen, not envied, understood. But that level of seeing requires depth most have abandoned. To be around others means drowning in fragments of conversations that skim the surface while your inner ocean howls to be heard. So you retreat, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. Solitude is not your prison, it's your altar. And in that sacred stillness you begin to hear something faint, the voice of the self. The voice that does not scream or beg but waits. The voice that knew you long before the world named you. And once you've heard it, the noise of the crowd can never satisfy again. But this is not a tragedy. It is a rebirth in disguise. Because those who cannot stay around many people are not broken. They are refining. They are being pulled back to remember their role, their symbolism, their place in a narrative far older than society's scripts. You are not here to be popular. You are not here to be understood by all. You are here to carry something that many have forgotten. To walk with a truth so raw that even your presence becomes a mirror. And mirrors are feared because they reflect what's real. That's why they avoid you. That's why you feel like a disruption. Because you are, but not a disruption of peace, a disruption of pretense. And the moment you stop resisting that role, the moment you allow your discomfort to be the compass, something begins to shift. Not out there, but in here. You weren't born to be one of them, and that truth terrifies you, because it implies a life that might never feel familiar. But let me ask you something uncomfortable. What if familiarity was never the point? What if every lonely night, every crowded room that made you feel smaller, every friendship that shattered in silence was not a punishment, but a calling? You were not abandoned. You were filtered. There is a violence in the sacred that most people cannot comprehend. The sacred demands separation. And the deeper your essence, the sharper the knives that cut you away from what is false. This is not cruelty. It is precision, archetypal precision. The world will not hand you peace. It will carve it out of you. Carl Jung warned us that integration is not about healing the world's opinion of us. It is about reclaiming every part we were told to exile, especially the ones that made others uncomfortable. Your sensitivity? A gift distorted into weakness. Your vision? Mocked as delusion. Your solitude? Misread as isolation. But every one of those parts, every single one, is part of the map. And here's the irony. The more you try to fix yourself to fit, the more you distort the very signal that makes you chosen. Because being chosen is not about being better. It is about being attuned, to see the invisible threads, to feel the vibrations that others block out, to know things without being told, and that knowing cannot thrive in the crowd. Because the crowd, my dear, feeds on noise, and you were made of signal. That's why your presence feels disruptive. You don't even have to speak. You walk into a room and people feel it. Like the weather suddenly changed. Like something in them is being seen they didn't ask to reveal. You carry light, yes, but you also carry shadow. You are not just the healer, you are the trigger. Because you don't reflect who they pretend to be. You reflect what they refuse to face. Their masks tremble in your presence. Their lies grow louder when you're near. And so, they call you too intense, too much, too different. But these are not insults, and they are admissions. They are telling you who you are by revealing what they are not. Still, I know what you're thinking. If I'm meant to walk alone, how do I survive the ache? How do I carry this weight without growing bitter, without collapsing under the burden of invisibility? Listen closely now. You do not survive by shrinking. You survive by surrendering. Not to them, to yourself. You surrender to the knowing that your energy cannot be diluted to keep others comfortable. You stop negotiating your truth for scraps of connection. You stop trying to be less so that they can pretend to be more. Because the moment you choose yourself fully, without apology, you summon a frequency so powerful that those who resonate will find you, not many, not quickly, but real. And one by one they will come, not for your mask, but for your mirror. But don't wait for them. Don't delay your transformation hoping the world will one day understand you. It may never. And that's not your failure, it's your freedom. You are not here to explain yourself. You are here to embody yourself. And embodiment is not an idea, it is a fire. It is the fierce act of standing tall in rooms that misunderstand you, of breathing fully even when no one listens, of loving your solitude not as lack, but as lineage. Because solitude is the womb of the chosen. It is where the self whispers its clearest truths. And those truths, ancient, electric, inconvenient, were never meant to be shouted in crowds. They were meant to be lived in silence until silence becomes a song only the initiated can hear. And now I ask you, what if you were never meant to be understood, only remembered? What if the ache you feel is not from missing others, but from missing yourself in their presence? What if the reason you don't feel safe in the crowd is because your soul is too loud to hide there anymore? These are not questions for the mind. They are echoes from the deep. And if you've heard them, truly heard them, then you know your path cannot look like theirs. Your pace will be slower, your nights longer, your shadows deeper. But your light, it will be real, unmistakable. And no crowd in the world can give you that. Only the courage to keep walking can. There is a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when the chosen one stops trying to return, stops looking for the old places to offer the new self, stops believing that reconciliation with the world is a form of healing. It isn't. Healing begins the moment you stop explaining your pain to people committed to misunderstanding it, the moment you no longer feel the need to decorate your truth with politeness. You look around and suddenly the illusion becomes unbearable, the performance exhausting, the parties that leave you emptier, the friendships that demand your fragmentation, the conversations where your silence screams louder than your words. And in that moment you realize solitude is not a punishment, it is a preparation. But this is where most retreat, not because they are weak, but because they are afraid of what they will find when the noise disappears. Because what waits in the silence is not comfort, it is truth, unfiltered, wild. Your shadow greets you first, not as enemy but as mirror. Every rejection, every moment of exclusion, every time you were too much or too sensitive or too intense, it all comes back, not to haunt you but to unmask you. The chosen ones are forged not in praise but in the fire of being misunderstood. And here is the unbearable paradox. The more you become yourself, the less you are recognized by the world that shaped your mask. The more honest you are, the lonelier the path becomes. And yet, you continue. Because the pain of pretending becomes greater than the pain of being alone. Because you'd rather be hated for your truth than loved for your absence. You begin to see things others don't. Not in visions or fantasies, but in patterns. You hear the lie behind the compliment. You feel the emptiness behind the applause. You sense the shadow behind the smile. And you begin to speak less, not because you have nothing to say, but because the space cannot hold what you carry. This is not arrogance. This is evolution. The self begins to take the wheel. And when the self is in command, everything superficial begins to fall away. People, roles, labels, goals, it all crumbles. And in the dust of that collapse, something stirs. Something old, something sacred, something true. That's when you start remembering. Not with your mind, with your bones. You remember that your difference is not a flaw, it is a frequency. That your solitude is not a curse, it is a code. That your sensitivity is not an error, it is your edge. You begin to see your life not as a random chain of events, but as a designed initiation. Every heartbreak, a doorway. Every betrayal, a mirror. Every exile, a purification. The crowd was never your source. It was your crucible. It was never about being liked. It was about being lit, set on fire by the truth of who you are. And in that flame, the false burns away. But still you feel it. The ache of knowing you cannot go back. The ache of watching others live comfortably in cages you've already outgrown. The ache of being the one who sees in a world that desperately chooses blindness. This ache is holy. It is not to be solved. It is to be honored. Because it means you are alive. Still cracking. Still unraveling. Still walking the path your soul chose before you could speak its language. You are not here to be entertained. You are here to remember, and remembrance always costs comfort. That is the price. That is the offering. That is the sign you're close, because just before you reach the clearing, the forest always grows darker. Just before the truth clicks into place, the doubt screams its loudest, and just before your power returns, people will leave. Let them. Their departure is your alignment. Their silence is your invitation. Their absence is your mirror. You were never meant to carry everyone. Only those who can walk beside you without asking you to dim. And if they haven't arrived yet, it's because your light is still sharpening. Let it sharpen. Let it burn. Let it become unbearable. Because only the unbearable ever changes anything. The chosen ones are not chosen because they are favored. They are chosen because they are prepared. Prepared not by comfort, but by collision. Not by applause, but by exile. Their lives are not made of trophies, but of thresholds. And each threshold they cross alone. The world does not recognize them because the world is not made to hold what cannot be controlled. And you, yes you, are one of them. You've been told your whole life that your depth is too much, that your silence is suspicious, that your clarity is arrogance. But let me ask you now, if you've spent your whole life feeling like a stranger, then what exactly were you born into? There's something in you the world could not digest. Not because it was poison, but because it was pure. You entered this life with a song only you could hear, a map only you could read, a code written between your bones. But to walk it required forgetting, because remembering too early would have destroyed you. That's why you were pulled into crowds. That's why you tried so hard to belong. Not because you were weak, but because you had to forget yourself in order to find yourself again. And this forgetting and this temporary amnesia of the soul to you was sacred, necessary. But now you feel it again. The quiet voice, the tug behind the ribs, the sense that there's more to your story than survival, that your pain wasn't random, that your patterns weren't accidents, that even your loneliness had a language. You see, people fear what they can't label, and you were never meant to be labeled. You are not a personality. You are not a role. You are not a diagnosis. You are a force, a convergence of memory, shadow, archetype, and fire moving through human skin. And that force cannot thrive in shallow waters. It cannot beg for scraps of validation in rooms that choke your spirit. It cannot negotiate truth with people addicted to illusions. That's why the moment you stop trying to be understood is the moment you are. Not by the world, but by the parts of yourself that were waiting in the dark, waiting for you to stop pretending, waiting for you to return, not to the crowd, but to the center. And in that center, everything changes. You no longer measure your worth by how many texts you receive. You no longer anchor your joy in someone else's attention. You no longer apologize for the heaviness of your truth. You become dangerous, not to others, but to the system that fed off your doubt. You begin to walk differently, speak differently. You choose silence not as avoidance, but as declaration. You say no and feel lighter. You leave rooms earlier. You stop trying to explain your essence to ears not tuned to hear it. And in that stillness, in that sovereignty, the right ones find you. They do not dazzle. They recognize. They do not compete. They witness. They do not need your performance. They crave your presence. And finally, you are met. But even then, the ache never leaves fully. Because part of your role is to walk just slightly ahead, to feel the weight others haven't felt yet, to speak truths others aren't ready to hear, to carry the wound and the wisdom in the same breath. You are not here for ease. You are here for essence. And essence is earned in the shadows. Jung taught us that wholeness is not the absence of darkness, but the embrace of it. And that darkness is sacred. It contains your memory, your meaning, your medicine. And when you stop fearing it, when you allow it to teach you instead of silence you finally see. Your solitude was never empty. It was initiatory. So now the question is not, why can't I be around many people? The question is, why do I keep trying to be? Why do you still abandon yourself to sit at tables that dishonor your hunger? Why do you shrink your light so others won't feel blind? Why do you mistrust your knowing every time someone with a louder voice speaks a softer lie? You are not here to blend. You are here to reveal, to awaken, to hold, to remember. And not everyone will follow. And that's okay. They were not meant to, because the chosen do not belong everywhere. They belong exactly where their presence cracks the illusion. And now, as the echoes settle, and the breath finds its rhythm again, you may begin to notice something shifting, not outside, but within. It is not a realization that arrives with thunder, but a whisper barely louder than your heartbeat. A knowing, older than language, stirring beneath the weight of all the roles you've tried to play. And as you sit here, still surrounded by silence, perhaps for the first time in a long while, the silence no longer feels empty. It feels true. The journey you have walked through these words was never about answers. It was about remembrance. And remembrance does not scream. It returns slowly, like smoke rising from the coals of a forgotten fire. You may not be able to explain what just happened. You may even doubt it later, but some part of you knows that you were not brought here by accident. Knows that everything in your life and every disconnection, every unanswered message, every night spent wondering why you feel like a stranger in your own life was part of a design too intricate to be random. There are no crowds where the soul does its deepest work. The fire that transforms is not lit in arenas. It is lit in caves, in quiet places where no applause can reach. You who feel too much, who see behind the smiles, who carry the ache of ancient truths in modern skin. You were never meant to be everywhere. You were meant to be fully somewhere. And that place is not out there. It is in here, in this stillness, in this breath, in this sacred separation that once felt like rejection, but now begins to look like preparation. We spend so much of life chasing closeness, forgetting that some distances are divine. That absence is often the invitation to presence. That to stand apart is not always to be alone. Sometimes it is to rise. And rising is not loud. It's not obvious. It doesn't announce itself with banners or songs. It happens in the small choices. In the moment you choose truth over approval, depth over noise, self over the world. And that's when the transformation begins. Quietly, irrevocably. Not as a performance, but as a return. You may walk away from this not fully understanding what was unlocked, but you will feel it. In your bones, in the way you breathe when no one is watching, in the way you stop forcing smiles that hurt your face, in the way you stop explaining your spirit to minds that refuse to listen. You will not be louder. You will be clearer, not brighter, but more true. And from that truth, a new kind of connection begins to form. Not fast, not many, but real, like soul meeting soul in the dark, and finally recognizing the light. And if I could leave one image with you, one truth buried beneath all the others, let it be this. You are not here to be understood. You are here to awaken memory in others. And sometimes that memory begins in your silence. So stay close to the stillness. Honor the ache. Do not run from the rooms that cannot hold you. They were never built for you in the first place. Walk with reverence through the spaces between people, knowing that emptiness is not always lack and sometimes it is signal. And when you feel the doubt creep in again, as it will, place your hand on your heart and remember, your difference is not your wound. It is your witness. If something in you stirred, even faintly, then allow it to breathe. Don't dismiss it, don't silence it with the scroll. Let it linger, let it echo. And if you felt seen here, if something ancient in you was named without needing to be explained, then you already know what to do. Subscribe to Archmind not as an action, but as a choice. A choice to walk with others who remember. A choice to keep the fire lit, to nurture the silence where truth speaks loudest. Like this video, if it held a mirror to your soul, share it with those who carry this same ache. They will know. And in the comments, tell me, what have you remembered today that the world tried to make you forget because somewhere, someone is waiting for your words to feel less alone?